Vince McMahon Sr. brought me into his promotion as a heel, a bad guy. In Allentown, Pennsylvania, that never had a negative effect on me. It didn't matter to the people there if you were a good guy like Bob Backlund or Bruno Sammartino, or a bad guy like Ken Patera, the Olympic strongman, or Ivan Koloff, the Russian bear. If you were a star, they would cheer for you, and they cheered the hell out of Hulk Hogan. But in the arenas around that part of the country, the fans were more aware of the rivalries that were going on. So in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, or Albany, New York, or Syracuse, New York, they would cheer the good guys and boo me. And if that was all they did, it would have been okay. But on several occasions, they let their feelings about me carry over into the parking lot. I had a Lincoln Continental at the time, and the fans would see me park it when I arrived. By the time I came out at the end of the night, my antenna would be broken off, my windows would be cracked, and my tires would be slashed. And there would be like 500 wads of spit on the car. It looked like a bunch of kids had just sat around for an hour just spitting on it. We were doing an Allentown TV, and I was in the dressing room when I got a note handed to me by Arnold Skolin, who was a backstage road agent for the company. The note said to call Sylvester Stallone. Yeah, right, I thought. Sylvester Stallone wants to talk to me? I showed it to the guys in the dressing room, and they all had a good laugh. So I took the note and threw it away and figured that was the end of it. Then I went to Japan for 4 weeks. American wrestlers are incredibly popular over there. When I came back, it was time to do another TV in Allentown. So I was back in the same dressing room, and this time Arnold Skolin handed me a Western Union letter. It said, Sylvester Stallone wants you to appear in his next Rocky movie. So I called Sylvester Stallone, and on my next day off, I found myself on a plane heading for Los Angeles. As soon as I walked into the studio where I was supposed to meet Stallone, somebody put a big handheld camera in my face and said, "We're filming a documentary. You don't mind, do you?" I said, "No, I don't mind." I didn't even know what a documentary was. Then Stallone came over and said hello to me. Funny thing, in the American public's eyes, Sylvester Stallone was 700 feet tall. In reality, he was only 5'8" and 160 pounds soaking wet. Anyway, Stallone asked me to get into the ring with him and move around a little. So I took my shirt off, and he put on a pair of boxing gloves, and we got into the ring they had set up there in the studio. All of a sudden, Stallone took a swing at me. Not knowing what he was after, I let him hit me. He said, "No, try to stop me from hitting you." "I don't mind getting hit," I told him, not having the slightest idea what he wanted. Brother, I didn't care what he did. I just wanted to get the part. "Okay," he said, "just try to stop me." So as soon as he threw his fist at me, I reached out and grabbed his left arm and armbarred it and took him down. He said, "Wow, you're pretty quick for a big guy." Well, I told him, if we were in a real street fight and you ever got close enough to hit me, it would be all over. I could just take you down and break your arm or do whatever I wanted with you. You could see in his expression that he was impressed so far. "Okay," he said, "now hit me on the back as hard as you'd hit another wrestler." I said, "Nah, I don't think you want me to do that." He said, "Come on, I'm a tough guy, I can take it." Finally, I only hit him about 75%, right between the shoulder blades. And as soon as my arm hit his back, his face hit my cowboy boots. Bang, splat, real fast. All of a sudden, everybody panicked and jumped into the ring. But Stallone just got up and regrouped and told everybody that everything was cool. Then he said, "Let's get out of the ring." So I followed him out of the ring. Before I knew it, he was in my face and the guy with the camera was standing there. And Stallone said, "All right, you're a nobody. You're nothing but a fake wrestler. Now get mad and start talking." And for the first time that day, I thought I knew what he wanted. He wanted the kind of stuff we did on promo spots. So I said, "Rocky Balboa, I'll break you in half like a little toothpick. I'll turn you into a Philadelphia cheese sandwich." Stuff like that. Stallone said, "Great, you got the job." I said, "Wow, that's unbelievable." Then Stallone said, "I'll give you $10,000 to play a wrestler in my movie." I said, "No, I want 15. Hell, I didn't know what I was talking about. I might have gotten a couple $100,000, who knows? I just knew you should never accept the first offer. So Stallone said, "I tell you what, I'll give you $14,000. I took it. So without an agent, without even reading the contract, I signed something right there on the ring apron. Let me tell you, brother, I was ecstatic. I went running back to New York and told Vince McMahon Sr. that I got a part in the next Rocky movie. I thought he'd be happy for me. Just one problem. The movie's shooting schedule conflicted with Vince's plans for me to end my career in New York and go to work for the Crockett people in the Carolinas. Of course, he had never told me any of that, so it was news to me. Vince said, "You can't do this. You work for me. You're a wrestler, not an actor." But I told him, "I want to do this. It's only going to take 10 days to film this part. You can spare me for 10 days. Vince looked at me over his glasses and said, "This is how it works. If you leave to do the Rocky movie, you'll never work for this company again." I said, "Well then, I guess I'll never work here again." And I left. And a few days later, Stallone flew me to Los Angeles. So I did Rocky III and made my $14,000, which was no money at all, really. But I did get good exposure. Only then did I have time to reflect on what Vince McMahon had said to me and how I had lost my job. Around that time, I got an idea. I asked Stallone if I could have some publicity stills from the movie. I was standing next to Stallone, holding him over my head, all kinds of crazy stuff. He wasn't supposed to release the pictures yet, but he gave them to me, and I sent them to a promoter in Minnesota named Vern Gagne, a two-time NCAA champion who ran the American Wrestling Association, or the AWA. Vern Gagne called me as soon as he got the publicity shots. He was a shrewd guy. He knew he was looking at a damn gold mine. "How soon can you start?" he asked me. I told him I could start right away. So I went to Minnesota to wrestle for the American Wrestling Association. If you were a wrestler in the early 80s, Minnesota was the ideal place to work. You would wrestle only 3 or 4 days a week and make as much money as you would if you worked 7 days in New York. So it was like a dream to go to Minnesota. When they saw my pictures as Thunderlips in the Rocky movie, they wanted to bring me in as a bad guy. So I came in, and for the first 3 or 4 weeks I didn't wrestle. All I did was talk in interviews with my back to the camera. The TV viewers just saw the back of my hair and my muscles. I didn't have a hole in my hat yet. I had a full head of hair back then. And I would say, "If you want to see my face, you're going to have to buy a ticket to come to the St. Paul Civic Center a month from now." I was talking like a bad guy, talking like a heel, trying to generate as much heat as I could. It must have worked because the event sold out. But as soon as I got into the ring, the fans started cheering and going crazy. I was a heel. They weren't supposed to be cheering me. They were supposed to be booing me. But my gimmick was I was from Venice Beach, California, and in Minnesota, they thought anyone from California was a god. So instantly I was a good guy, whether I liked it or not. Vern Gagne panicked. He said, "Oh my God, what am I going to do? They're cheering him out of the building." His number one good guy for a lot of years, a wrestler named Crusher, had just left the AWA, so my timing was perfect. I came in and took the Crusher spot as a good guy. Whenever I came out to wrestle, I would play the Eye of the Tiger music from the Rocky movie. Most fans hadn't seen anything like that before. Very few wrestlers had ever played music on their way to the ring. When the fans heard that, they would go nuts. The whole arena would just start to rock. Then I would come into the ring and rip my shirt off. That's where the gimmick started, back in Minnesota in the AWA. That's where I started planting the seeds that would grow into Hulkamania. One night when I was in LA, I called Nelson Kidwell, a high school buddy of mine who was living on the West Coast, and said, "Hey man, let's go out tonight." Nelson took me to a place in the valley called the Red Onion, a disco club with Tex-Mex food. I had just appeared in the Rocky movie, so all these girls thought I was an actor. They thought I had just played a wrestler, not that I was one. And to tell you the truth, I was going to let them think that as long as they wanted. That night, I was drinking wine out of a bottle. I had a pretty good buzz on, and I had so many of these blondes hanging around me, I didn't think anything of it when another one showed up. But as soon as she opened her mouth, I could tell she wasn't just another groupie. She said, "I hate to intrude, but I went to the drive-in with my mother, and E.T. was sold out, so we went to see Rocky III. And you look just like the guy in the movie." So I said, "That's right, I'm Mr. T, pity the fool." I joked with her a little, and then I said, "You're right, I'm Hulk Hogan, and I was in the movie." She said something to me about dancing, but I really didn't have my wits about me, so I told her I wasn't interested. I guess my buddy Nelson Kidwell was a little more clear-headed, because a minute later, I saw him out there on the dance floor with her. That's the first time I really saw how attractive she was. She was a really pretty girl with a brown, athletic-looking body and shapely legs. She was like a thoroughbred horse, plus she had a really nice ass on her. And here I'd just blown her off. What was I thinking? So when Nelson and this woman came off the dance floor, I took her by the arm and asked her if I could buy her a drink. She apparently wasn't holding a grudge against me because she said yes. At that point, I put the wine bottle down and ran all the other girls off and focused on this woman. It turned out she had a really appealing, upbeat personality, like she didn't have a care in the world. I found myself thinking this was someone I'd like to be around. I asked her if I could take her out and she said, well, let's talk about it. That made her even more appealing to me because it was going to be a challenge to win her over. I stayed with her the rest of the night. We talked and danced, and I did my best to get her to like me. Finally, she had to leave. I said, listen, I'm serious. I want to take you out. I told her my name and said, what's yours? She said her name was Linda, and she worked at this nail salon in the valley. It's in the phone book, she told me. The very next day, I called the nail shop. Whoever answered the phone said, it's the guy from the Red Onion. Then I heard Linda's voice saying, ask him his name. She had already forgotten it. Anyway, I got her on the phone and asked her out that night. But I wasn't familiar with LA, so I didn't know where to go. I said, let's meet at the Red Onion at 7 o'clock, since we both know where that is. As it turned out, we had a great night talking and dancing. And that was the start of my relationship with the woman who would become my wife. In general, it was hard maintaining our relationship. Linda was living in Los Angeles and I was living in Minnesota. When I flew to LA, I would call her up, spend 4 or 5 days taking her out and meeting her family, and then I'd have to leave again. That went on for 6 or 7 months. Finally, I told Linda, I'm madly in love with you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Would you move to Minnesota so we can get married there the first chance we get? Linda didn't beat around the bush. No way, she told me. I'm not going to move in with somebody. She made it tough on me, brother, but it was even tougher carrying on a relationship with her living so far away. Finally, I said, I tell you what, I'm going to go out and buy a house. I'm going to get you an engagement ring, and hopefully you'll think about moving to Minnesota. I had never owned a house in my life. That was a big deal, let me tell you. But I wanted to show Linda that I was doing everything right, that I was making an honest-to-God commitment. When she saw all that, she changed her mind and said she would move in with me, but only after we set a date. So I did it. I set a date to be married, and Linda, thank God, finally gave in and moved to Minnesota. There was a little rumbling coming from Minnesota, and the McMahons could feel the tremors all the way back to New York. Vern Gagne was thinking in terms of expansion. The AWA already went into Canada, Salt Lake City, Denver, and the West Coast. Now Vern was nosing around the East Coast, trying to buy TV time on Channel 9 in New York. One night at the Rosemont Horizon in Chicago, I was getting ready to go to the ring when Steve Taylor, an old friend of mine from the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, stuck his head through the curtains. Steve runs the production crew now for Vince Jr., but at the time he was a photographer. I was surprised as hell. I said, Steve, how the hell are you? Fine, he said, let me take a picture of you. Sure, I told him, no problem. So I struck a pose for Steve Taylor and he took the picture. But that wasn't why he'd come to see me in Chicago. He handed me a card. On the back of it, it said, call Vince McMahon immediately. I said to myself, boy, this is interesting. I was fired and he told me I'd never work there again. I guess things have changed. I wrestled that night, went home, and called Vince McMahon. But it wasn't Vince McMahon Sr. who answered. It was Vince McMahon Jr. He told me that he was going to be taking over the company from his father, and he wanted to make me the new champion of the World Wrestling Federation, the new name of the company. He had heard about this whole Hulkamania thing that I'd started in Minnesota, and he thought he could embellish it and make it even bigger. By the time we'd finished talking, we agreed on a 10-year deal for me to come back to New York. I told Linda, we're going to have a ton of heat, but I got to tell Vern Gagne I'm leaving the Minnesota territory.